From the right, I'm Matt Lewis.
From the left, I'm Bill Scher.
And you're watching
The Week in Blog.
Bill, this week, another job offer, this time in Colorado. Another blogger makes it to the big time. But first, Bill, the alleged affair between a blogger and gubernatorial candidate Nikki Haley in South Carolina takes another bizarre turn. Erick Erickson, who runs RedState.com, engaged in a bit of an interesting thought experiment this week, where he essentially said he had the goods, that he had proof that blogger Will Foltz, who had alleged the affair with Haley, had received money, was being paid off, and Bill, it turned out to be, well, we're not exactly sure what it was, but most likely a hoax. What is your read on this interesting twist and continuing story?
You know, I tried to go back and read the Red State posts, the criticism that Eric got from Byron York at the Washington Examiner, not endorsements, but at least mild slap on the wrist that Eric got from Dan Real at Real World View. Yeah, I'm just having a hard time trying to understand what actually happened.
It's weird. Well, let me set it up real quick. I mean, for those who weren't following it, so Erick Erickson at Red State on Thursday puts up a blog post where you have the sort of Drudge Report, siren going off, and it's breaking. We know who did it. Who paid Will Foltz? He was allegedly offered money, a lot of money. In fact, Red State now confirms through a whole heap of sources that he's been trying to sell this story for a year. We know who bit. We know who didn't bite. We know who paid Will Foltz to push this story out there. Oh, and you guys in the media, you've let folks string you along. We're going to string you along. Tune in later for the answer. Now, this is Thursday before Memorial Day, so people are obviously thinking that there's going to be another shoe to drop, right? That
he said there was a shoe to drop. I have a shoe. I'm going to drop it. Please come back.
Keep checking Red State. So people kept checking Red State, and they kept checking Red State, and they kept checking Red State, and eventually there was a post that came up that, I guess on Friday that it sort of, walked it back a little bit. It made some, insinuations that Andre Bauer, who I believe is the lieutenant governor, also running for governor, was behind it. But nothing else really came out of it. And then today, which is
no evidence
Thursday,
that we know who got paid and we know who didn't bite. There was none of that.
Right. So Erick Erickson finally, a week later, says, I got a lot of flack for stringing the media along last week, Will Foltz style. Even got some good friends thought I was grasping at straws, and my case for pointing the finger at Andre Bauer was too nebulous. Guess what? And now he's showing that there's the latest allegation, another rumor of an affair, came out from an Andre Bauer consultant. I guess someone who just quit consulting for Andre Bauer. But the interesting thing is that conservatives like Byron York, over the weekend, took a shot at Erick Erickson. And said, sacrificing your own credibility in an effort to undermine someone else's is not a good idea. And
that was Byron York's point?
Byron York, and what he says, what Erickson has done has surely hurt both his reputation and that of his website. Dan Real at Real World responded by saying, look, this was a failed experiment in a still experimental medium. Big whoop, let's get over it. Move on and never stop experimenting and learning as members of new media. In some ways, it's that type of fear and lack of risk-taking that led to the decline of old media. We're just beginning, and Eric continues to enjoy a well-deserved place in shaping it going forward. I guess, Bill, my question is, we don't know what happened. We don't know if Erick Erickson, if someone promised him they had the goods and then they, backed out or didn't have it, or if Eric was engaging in some sort of weird example of performance art, or just trying to drive traffic to Red State. But the real question is, should this be applauded as a sort of interesting experimental art form, Or is this really damaging to your credibility? If you're saying that you have the goods on somebody, stay tuned, and then you don't deliver.
I would say the latter is it's not even an opinion. I think the same goes for the guy at Fitz News, Will Forte. If you say, I have the goods, and then you don't have the goods,
right?
Just by definition, the next time you say, I have the goods, I'm going to say, I'm not sure you have the goods. Right. That is a literal weakening of one's credibility.
But obviously...
I don't see you get around that.
Right, but obviously the point here is that Eric was mocking Will Folks. Okay, so Will Folks made these crazy allegations that I'm going to reveal all sorts of stuff, and then he didn't deliver. So Eric was mocking that by showing how gullible the public is. So is it like an Andy Kaufman
but it's not 100% clear that this was intended as from start to finish, a mocking of,
that's true.
Of Will Forte?
Folks. Is it Folks? It's Folks, right?
Folks, I'm sorry. I mean, maybe it's what he was doing. If so, it's
right.
It's a very poorly explained prank.
It was bizarre. The one thing that makes me think Eric was attempting to sort of mock Will Folks is that after Folks made the initial blog post, the quote unquote editor of his website started writing about Will Folks, and a lot of people thought it was actually Will writing in the third person, as if I were to say, Matt Lewis says, this. So Eric began to mock that on the blog and on Twitter, saying things like, the intrepid Erick Erickson is, So Eric was clearly mocking the third person sort of style. So it is plausible to believe that he was actually mocking the whole Will Folks claiming to have this evidence and then not delivering. But I think the point is, if you go back to Byron York's, Byron York says, apparently Erickson's intent was to call attention to Folks' nasty tactics and the likelihood that Folks is attacking Haley on behalf of some other player in the South Carolina political world. But he says, but sacrificing your own credibility in an effort to undermine someone else's is not a good idea, and what Erickson has done has surely hurt both his own reputation and that of a website. I mean, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say he is trying to kind of illustrate absurdity by being absurd. And he's not a comedian. He's not Andy Kaufman. I mean, is this a bad idea if you're trying to be a credible blogger? And
well, I mean, it's a bad idea. I mean, whenever we've had debates, not you and me, just me in general, arguing about, bloggers versus traditional media, people who have been very... painting bloggers with a broad brush would say, I trust my newspaper, my TV show, because they have editors, they have people fact-checking, and bloggers are just one person who can do whatever they want. There's no check on their behavior. And I would say, look, don't lump all bloggers together. Check each individual blog and see how they do. Same way I do with traditional media. Just because you're an editor, you can still screw things up. And people who work by themselves sometimes do good work or sometimes go off the rails. I would look at, if the next time Red State has a scoop of some sort that they're touting, I'm going to question and wait to see more evidence, the same as I would with this other South Carolina site, Fitz News. I just don't, I mean, maybe not everybody's going to do that, but I got to believe somebody's going to do that. And that's, I mean, not just for the reputation of Red State, but here's Erick Erickson trying to transition to traditional media, being a CNN pundit. That's certainly not the way. I'm sure that does not fly with CNN's rules and regulations either.
Well, the funny
maybe
thing
CNN doesn't care anymore, but I would think it'd be a dangerous move for someone who's trying to build up a larger profile for himself.
It seems as if nobody cares. I mean,
it could well be that nobody cares. That everyone's credibility is so shot, there's nothing you can do to go any lower. Maybe that's the case.
Byron York wrote about it, but and called him out. But I think the thing that surprises me is that it doesn't really seem that anybody cares or is that surprised. And I don't know what to think about that. But
Well, yes, I mean, some people go to these sites already with a certain amount of grain of salt and might just enjoy the ride. Hey, there's a siren. What's going to happen next? What's the next twist and turn of this choose-your-own adventure story? And they're not going into it with some assumption that they're functioning as a regular news outlet, and therefore it doesn't affect anyone's reading patterns.
Well, and it does remind me a little bit of, you remember there was a Hillary Clinton blogger who alleged that the guy had like a FBI or CIA background.
Oh, this is Larry Johnson, no quarter.
Johnson,
right? He was pushing Michelle Obama rumors throughout the campaign, and he came up empty, and you know what? I don't hear very much about him anymore because his credibility was shot.
Well, he said that there was a videotape, too, that was going to come out. And even, I think it was, who was it? Who's the guy who ran Walter Mondale's campaign in 84? Bob Beckel was even on Fox and saying, this thing's going to come out, you know, and alleging that this bombshell was going to drop on about her saying whitey or whatever. It's interesting. I just have to tell you, I mean, look, we all make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But I think if you want, you've got to. If you say you're going to deliver the goods, you've got to deliver it. You know, it's I don't know. It's just like, look, I'm all for the new media, but I think that like it's not like we can transcend ethics. You know what I mean?
I don't think that anything Erick Erickson does or Will Folks does directly implicates other bloggers. Like, every blogger is responsible for him or herself. But unfortunately, some people are going to look at this and say, oh, blogging is where scurrilous rumors begin, and then ignore all the good work that's done, you know, at other blogs, which is unfortunate. But part of that problem is the fact that regular media took a completely unfounded allegation from one blog and treated it as if it was a news story. You know, they suspended their own journalistic ethics to report on that. When if they kept their mouths shut and said, okay, let's see if this guy actually has the goods before I report on it, then it would not be as big of a deal.
That's a good point, and nobody has called them on it. The first time I heard about it was a tweet, I think, from Peter Hamby, who works at CNN, and he tweeted out that, you know, South Carolina's most prominent blogger is alleging an affair with Nikki Haley. Now, that was accurate. That was correct. There was, you know, he didn't say the affair was true.
No, it's not lying, but you're now in the position of being a conduit for rumor.
Yeah.
Not a journalistic organization that does their own reporting before they report things.
Tough to pass that one up, though, dude, because he, you know, I hate to say break that story because you're arguing it's not a story, but if you're the one who reports on that rumor, and you do it in, I think he did it, I would say in a responsible way of saying, well, number one, the guy was the top South Carolina blog, so that's true. You always learn this. If I don't report on it, somebody else will. I mean, that's really
clearly the MO of media these days, and I think it makes sense from them from a straight up business model because people like chasing a mystery story.
Well, here's the thing.
It's going to spike your ratings to some degree, but it's not proper journalism.
I don't think I would have done what Eric did, but I do think I would have done what. And look, maybe I'm laying this on Peter Hamby, and maybe he didn't break it. But the first time I saw it, he tweeted it out. But whoever it was, I probably would have done the same thing. So I don't want to, you know, that's just sort of my...
You love a good scandal, Matt.
Yeah, I do. I mean, look, especially if it's being presented in a responsible, accurate manner. So, well, anyway, we'll just probably have to keep monitoring this. The election's on Tuesday, June 8th. Nikki Haley, again, it's an interesting race. I mean, you know, you've got Andre Bauer, the lieutenant governor, is running. You've got Henry McMaster, the attorney general, and Congressman Gresham Barrett running, and Nikki Haley. So it will be an interesting race. I think she just put out a TV ad that was her and her family, an obvious attempt to sort of blunt this attack. But we'll wait to see what
nothing
happens.
about South Carolina politics, and having my pundit reputation already besmirched this year with Scott Brown, I will guess this. It seems like the story is, are you siding with Nikki Haley or not?
Yeah.
It's not really about the issues so much anymore right now. And this primary is next week?
It's Tuesday, June 8th.
Tuesday. So if it's
Unless
are
I'm
you with
wrong.
Nikki or not with Nikki, and you got several other guys running, she probably gets the plurality, because if you're not with Nikki, then that vote gets dispersed.
Yeah, I think it's possible that in a bizarre way this helps her. I think that if I'm betting, I think Nikki Haley pulls it out. I think that voters have become a little more sophisticated, and I don't necessarily think this helps. Helps, it looks desperate unless something else comes out, and it looks desperate. It looks like nasty negative politics, and it looks bogus. The other thing is, let's say she did have the affair. I'm not even sure that's a disqualifier. I don't know.
That's a whole other moral
That's
question.
a whole other thing. That's a whole other question, but maybe, who knows? So we'll have to wait and keep an eye on it. But the reason I thought it was worthy of this discussion is the whole debate over blogger ethics and, is this like a merry prankster thing where you're using this medium to illustrate absurdity, or are we sort of like mini journalists who have some of the same ethical boundaries, but are maybe writing about things that the mainstream media won't write about, or in some cases holding the mainstream media accountable?
Well, it all depends on what kind of blogger you want to be.
Yeah.
If Red State wants to be a blog where people go to for the occasional news scoops along with commentary, then you better get your news scoops right.
Yeah.
Anywho, in other alleged supposed scandal, the right is definitely trying to hit the White House with this claim that they tried to unethically lure Colorado Senate candidate Andrew Romanoff out of a primary against incumbent Michael Bennet by offering him a job, similar to how John Sestak had this unpaid advisory position dangled in front of him if he didn't run against Arlen Specter. You have also at Red State Mark Impomeni saying this White House memo makes Offergate into a scandal. The Obama administration finds itself in the middle of its first genuine Washington scandal, and the White House's ham-fisted effort to sweep the budding scandal under the rug, failing to heed the lesson of Watergate, is largely to blame. I'm sorry. This is actually I'm conflating. Am I conflating posts? No, he's talking about.
I think you.
Pennsylvania here. I'm sorry. I saw it was. Oh, he goes on to talk about Colorado. One of the reports that Colorado Senate candidate Andrew Romanoff was similarly offered an administration post. The White House attempted to spin its way out of the Romanoff allegations now. Despite the White House effort to close the book on the Sestak affair, the Obama administration has given the next Woodward and Bernstein plenty of answers to chase. Offergate will likely compound itself now, growing bigger with each passing day the administration refuses to provide answers to the question that the explanation has raised. And for the administration, there's going to be no insurance that the cancer will not bust. So, trying to take both of these instances into a larger narrative.
Erick Erickson sent out a funny tweet today. He says, a friend sent a great email. Quote, Romanoffs should know things end badly when dealing with communists. So, a little lighthearted humor there.
Whereas the Washington Monthly, Steve Bannon, he writes on Thursday, another manufactured controversy ends in a whimper. And just like that, the air comes out of another balloon. Noting that the Romanoff spokesman said that the White House statement saying that that Romanoff applied for a job in advance of hearing back from the White House about these possibilities, not that these jobs were offered in the first place to get him out of the race. So Bannon says, what do we have here? Romanoff applied for a job with the administration and followed up with phone calls to administration officials about possible opportunities. he gave up about a year ago and turns attention to the Senate race. When the White House inquired with Romanoff about whether he was still interested in a possible position, he declined. That's the White House's version of events. That's Romanoff's version of events. There is no scandal. And then Digby Hullabaloo.
There is no scandal. That almost sounds like George H.W. Bush-esque.
And then Digby and Hullabaloo notes how the the Washington press corps is using its narrative to advance this is they're bad at politics, looking at a Politico story talking about how the White House political operation is losing its golden touch. And Digby then says, yeah, they're very concerned about Obama's image of yes, we can, grassroots empowerment. In fact, they found it so odd they forgot to write more than a passing sentence until the Republicans started spewing the scandal into their open mouths. I had to be one who thinks the party establishment should stay out of primaries, but I'll take a wild leap and assume it never occurred to the 99% of villagers until they read this piece. What do you say, Matt? Is this are conservatives succeeding in having this be seen as an actual scandal, or are liberal bloggers having some success at saying, look, this is really nothing to see here?
Well, look, I think both, because I think that in terms of, the people who think this is going to be Watergate, it won't for a variety of reasons, including it's a he said, she said, or he said thing. I mean, there is no tape, such as the tape that Nixon should have burned. There is no tape to prove whether or not these offers were made. I think it's probably laughable that Bill Clinton tried to tempt Joe Sestak to quit the Senate race, and the temptation was an unpaid advisory role. I think that's probably laughable, but it doesn't matter, because if there's no tape of it, of the conversation happening, then it didn't happen. You can't prove it. But I think, so I don't think there's going to be a huge scandal in terms of something that could bring down a presidency like Watergate. But what I do think is that we're slowly beginning to chip away at Barack Obama. And this is what happened to George W. Bush. It just happened over time that they wore him down to a pulp, actually. And so you see it happening with the BP oil crisis. You also see it happening here that, say with BP, Barack Obama was elected under the guise that he was going to be this very competent administrator. And you see the incompetence starting to become part of the narrative. But Barack Obama was also elected to change the tone of Washington, be more transparent, more ethical. And we see this as an example of politics as usual. So that's really what this will ultimately be. It's not going to be a silver bullet scandal that takes down Barack Obama, I don't think. But I think it's going to be just an example of how, one more example to prove that Barack Obama is really just a politician.
I definitely think that is what the conservative objective is here. And because the White House set a very high bar for itself in terms of talking about change, talking about transparency and changing politics from Washington, when something is done that is literally politics as usual, not illegal, not a scandal.
Actually, it is illegal if they offered, if there's a quid pro quo, if you offer someone a federal job to get them to do something else, that's actually illegal.
Well, Jonathan Shea of the New Republic earlier said that you could not interpret the law that way. That to say if you take this job, if you don't run for Senate, is not a bribe, because taking the job in and of itself precludes you from running for the Senate.
Well, I think that's a very Clinton-esque legal answer. I would beg to differ. I think the law is very clear here, but be that as it may, it's probably irrelevant, because I don't think that you can prove it. You would have to be able to prove it, and I don't think they can. Now, look, though, back in March, let's not forget, in March, Joe Sestak said that the White House offered him a job. I looked up job in dictionary, and it implies you are getting paid something. Not
unpaid advisory is not a job.
Not an unpaid advisory thing. So, but the point is, I don't think that the Republicans can prove that unless they captured somebody on tape, and I don't think they did.
Right. So there is the potential for success in sullying, the White House's preferred narrative with stuff like this. I would agree with that, but I would say, and we talked about this before, the bottom line of all this is jobs. And if the White House is seen as doing good work on creating jobs by November, that becomes the basis for a competence or incompetence narrative, and everything else becomes a sideshow. Whereas if job growth is seen as weak, then all these other little things add to the narrative. You're all thumbs. You're politics first, and
well, I think you're right.
Yada yada yada.
I think you're right in terms of the job offer thing. I think that story goes away unless another one comes out or something. But the oil spill is a tougher deal because it's going to keep spilling for the next couple months.
Possibly, yeah, and so, it would appear that nothing can be done to stop that. There isn't something that someone has proposed to do that they're not doing. But it's still, the blame still gets laid at your feet when it doesn't get solved, and that's always a frustrating aspect of being in power. There are certain things that are beyond your control you get blamed for regardless.
It's like managing a baseball team. Presidents get credit when they don't necessarily deserve it, and they get blamed when they don't necessarily deserve it. And on one hand, this is unfair because Barack Obama didn't cause the oil spill, and there's probably nothing he could have done differently to fix it. But on the other hand, it's fair because if this had been George W. Bush on his watch, it would have been 10 times worse. So we can debate the fairness of it, but it is what it is.
Well, Obama this week tried to change that narrative and frame the debate going into the 2010 midterm elections with a largely economic address in Pittsburgh, where he employed not just some of the more partisan language than you generally hear him give, but also offering very clear ideological contrast between Democrats and Republicans, which he's often glossed over to the chagrin of a lot of liberals who have been urging him to talk about how a failure of conservatism got us to this point, and it's a progressive ideology that will fix things over the long run. He came the closest to doing that in this address, where he said, to be fair, a good deal of the other party's opposition to our agenda has been rooted in their sincere and fundamental belief about government. It's a belief that government has little or no role to play in helping this nation meet our collective challenges. It's an agenda that basically offers two answers for every problem we face: more tax breaks for the wealthy and fewer rules for corporations. Now we have a choice as a nation. We can return to the failed economic policies of the past, or we can keep building a stronger future. Tim Fernholz at
this is the problem with Barack Obama, because just when I am starting to be like, look, let's be fair, there's nothing he could have done, he didn't cause this, and now he has to come out, and every time he starts off by saying let's be fair, his next move is to be entirely unfair. Why is there's a national crisis, and he is playing politics here. I mean, Mary Catherine Ham over at Weekly Standard noted the total speech was 5,433 words. He devoted 193 words to the oil spill, but 676 words to the Republicans. Why is he using this disaster? And I guess it goes back to Rahm Emanuel's never miss an opportunity to take advantage of a crisis, or whatever that line was.
Well, I don't think that's quite a fair reading of. I mean, the speech was not all about, as Mary Catherine Ham said, it wasn't about the oil spill. The oil spill is just one piece of that speech. He's talking about the broader economic situation and laying that at conservatives' feet.
But let me just say, though, Bill, going back to our last sort of discussion where we were talking about, Barack Obama promised to be more competent, and that's failed. And he promised to be more sort of transparent and ethical, and now that's coming under question. Well, he also promised to be post-partisan, and this is not. We're facing the worst ecological disaster in America's history, and he is using his time not to comfort Americans, not to call us to listen to our better angels, or to come together as a country, or to unite the way that FDR or Winston Churchill or Ronald Reagan would have done. He is using his time to blame George W. Bush and Republicans. How's that going to bring Americans together? I don't see how that...
I don't think he's using the crisis to do that. I mean, he had a whole press conference the day before where he talked far more about the oil spill. They talked about, elections and ideology. If you want to count up his words over the course of the past 2 weeks, they're far more about the oil spill than anything else. But your point is a legitimate one in that this speech was not a post-partisan speech. I would say he's tried to be post-partisan for a long time, and a lot of politicians will switch from being in governing mode to campaign mode. George H.W. Bush had very abrupt shifts. Coming together to pass a bill that would raise taxes to close the deficit gap, working with Democrats on that, but still ran very hard against Democrats come election time. That's not terribly unusual. But it is a notable shift in Obama's rhetoric for him to do that. It opens himself up to the charge that you're laying that you're not being post-partisan. And that's a question that only the voters can answer in November. Are you making a fair case that you are legitimately burying a failed ideology and slowly turning the ship around towards more active government? And he's being very candid that he wants to have more active government in this speech. Or is he making excuses and blaming the other guy when he's got a lot of problems on his hands that he hasn't solved? I mean, that's a judgment for voters to make.
By the way, Bill, just across the wire here, you'll be happy to know that according to Politico's Dave Catanese, Lieutenant Governor Bill Halter has said that there was no job offer for him to get out of the race. So that is good news. That will also be on Tuesday. Big elections on Tuesday. California, Nevada, Arkansas. So.
Right. So Tim Fernholz at American Prospect was cheering Obama's speech, saying this will cheer the Democratic political operatives who worry that the president's refusal to confront Republicans would leave his congressional allies blowing in the breeze. It's a two-part bank shot the Democrats are planning for 2010. Make the race a choice between competing agendas, not a referenda, and highlight enough early returns on the Democrats' program to lead voters to reelect the governing party. So he's saying, the overall speech is not just the blame shift. It's trying to say, here is what I am doing to fix the problems of the past. And the other party, while they're carping about what I haven't accomplished yet, are only offering the failed policies of the past. Can you make that pivot? Is a legitimate question, but that's clearly what he's trying to do in the speech. And a lot of people in Congress who were worried, hey, you're being all nicey nice to Lindsey Graham and whatnot, and you're railing against Washington and in calcitrant Congress, that screws me. So why are you doing that? You got to stick it to the Republicans. He's doing that there, and you're also getting some plaudits from environmental bloggers like David Roberts, who really love the fact that Obama, and here's a case where Obama is using the oil spill crisis to say this is a reason to pass a comprehensive climate protection and clean energy jobs bill. Environmentalists were begging him to do that, and they were worried that he wasn't elevating that issue for fear that it didn't have good prospects in Congress. He explicitly made that connection in the speech, and David Roberts at Grist saying, one speech won't do anything. The rhetoric for the administration has been all about what the Senate will do, what they hope it will do, what they expect it will do. But now it's not about them, it's we, and it's not about hope, it's will. We will get it done. That's the kind of thing that's hard to climb down from. It's what the beginnings of real commitment look like.
Here's the beauty of liberalism, though, Bill. Here's the beauty here's the ingenious strategy behind liberalism.
Please, tell me.
They're at the helm, on their watch, the largest ecological disaster in mankind. Well, not in mankind, probably. That might be Chernobyl. But in America's history happens. On their watch. On their watch. And the response is, let's be more liberal.
Are you actually arguing that liberalism caused the oil spill?
Well, I don't know that I'm arguing that, but I'm saying a month before Barack Obama, gave a speech saying we need to drill more. There's always the
and liberals are many liberals are very mad at him about that. But I would argue, it's certainly politically awkward that he did that. But the whole point of the drilling speech that he gave in April and the speech he gave this week is all the same. It's always been about having a all of the above comprehensive energy plan. This is the kind of thing the Republicans used to be talking about, where yes, we drill more in some places, yes, we have nuclear power, but yes to wind, and yes to solar, and yes to geothermal, and having that be part of a comprehensive cap on carbon that makes sure we don't have a overarching climate crisis. That part was not in the Republicans' all of the above plan in 2008. But the basic all of the above strategy is consistent from the spring to the summer.
This just strikes me as one of those never let a crisis go to waste thing. We have this horrible disaster, and people are thinking, how can we further our
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with saying, crises happen for a reason, and so you have an opportunity to say, hey, there's a reason why we got in this mess. Let's now do something to avert that crisis in the future, and reducing our long-term consumption of oil is like it's going to reduce the risk of having giant oil spills and oil leaks. That doesn't strike me as being a politically illegitimate way to respond to a crisis.
Well, what if I were to propose that the real solution is that we shouldn't be drilling so far offshore and deep water?
I think people would have... Plenty of liberals would agree with that, too. And I think what the White House has to do now, because they weren't emphasizing... the original offshore drilling expansion was meant to be done in a targeted way. It was not opening up ANWR. It was not opening up the Pacific coast. It was not opening up the upper Northeast. It was to say, let's try to do this in a safe and sound way. And there's a legitimate argument that Obama had not done enough reform of the Minerals and Management Service to embark on that kind of limited expansion safely. And now they're redoubling their efforts to say, okay, how do we clean house in that agency? What new regulations should we put on offshore drilling so we can do this appropriately? And many liberals, most liberals, not all liberals, would prefer that there were no offshore drilling at all. But the White House is trying to come up with a compromise so they can get a bill passed and get some Republican support and moderate Democrats as well. So, that's why they're in these tricky political positions.
Hey, Bill, why don't you tell us before we forget about your upcoming conference?
You are too kind, sir. Well, because as there is this issue, is the White House rallying the progressive base, or are they irritating the progressive base going into 2010? My group, Campaign for America's Future, is hosting our annual America's Future Now conference. It used to be called Take Back America. And that's going to be a key question. We actually have a formal debate at the conference, conference-wide debate. Should progressives be all in on the Obama agenda, or should they be organizing independently to pressure the White House to move in a more bold and progressive direction? Darcy Berner of Progressive Congress and Deepak Bhargava of Center for Community Change are going to lead that debate and discussion. And you're also going to have their Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Congressman Alan Grayson, Van Jones, Howard Dean, Arianna Huffington, and plenty of people weighing in on this question. And I actually had a chance to talk to Speaker Pelosi, and I blogged about it at ourfuture.org. She did a conference call with a handful of progressive bloggers and other reporters, and I asked her how should progressives be pushing for a bolder agenda, and she was arguing more for an all-in type of approach, where she said, let's not work against each other, let's not undermine each other, let's work together on a broader and bolder vision. And that is a contentious point in progressive circles, whether that we should be one happy family going forward, or do you need to have creative tension to push people in a stronger direction. And the Wall Street bill has been evidence to folks that challenging Blanche Lincoln in Arkansas with a progressive populist challenger led her to put forth stronger derivatives reform that led to a stronger Wall Street bill. So it's happening next week in Washington, D.C. America's Future Now, June 7th, 8th, and 9th at the Omni Shoreham. I'll be there as well as many others. I hope to see you there, Matt, if you have the time to fit into your busy schedule.
I would love to try to swing by there if I can. Sounds like fun. It's a great lineup. Seriously, this is a who's who of progressive politics lineup.
Absolutely. It's a hot ticket.
And people can find out about it by going to
ourfuture.org/now. And that's also going to be the site during the conference where you can see live streaming, blogging from the conference, live Twittering, hashtags AFN10 for anyone who's going to be there, or want to track what's going on at the conference. That's going to be the best place to follow the blow-by-blow.
So speaking of progressive bloggers, I guess we can end on this one. New York Times today reports that Nate Silver, a regular contributor to the newspaper and the Sunday magazine, he'll become a regular contributor. Apparently his blog 538, and of course he started off with Daily Kos, I believe.
He was a diarist under the pseudonym Poblano.
Which is a great restaurant if you're ever in Alexandria. Taqueria Poblano, my favorite Mexican
place. I had
no
idea.
California Mexican. Good stuff. But anyways, the interesting thing about this is, well, several interesting points. One is that sort of like the way that the Times hosts the Freakonomics blog, they're going to basically, he'll keep blogging at his own blog, but I guess the New York Times will host it and serve their ads. In exchange, he'll be compensated and he will be a contributor to the Times. That's an interesting model. We could talk about that. Are more bloggers going to go to that model? That would be something. The other point would be, this is yet another liberal going to a mainstream, New York Times, Washington Post type, prominent mainstream newspaper, and Ben Smith over at Politico. I took note of that today. So what's your take?
Well, in the case of Nate, Nate, definitely is liberal, although I wouldn't say probably the most liberal voice in the liberal blogosphere. Certainly willing to challenge the liberal bloggers on orthodoxy at times. But as an open supporter of Barack Obama and said so in the New York Times report on it, after Ben Smith complained, added that information. Brian Stelter said that the reporter said it was just an omission that he didn't mention in the first place. If you read Nate's polling analysis, though, he really doesn't put very much spin on the ball at all. It is pretty much a straight polling analysis site, and it's not going to be hard for him to pivot to the New York Times and just be a straight analyst. It's different, I think, than an Ezra Klein at the Washington Post, who's part and parcel is commentary. Ezra will do some straight news reporting too, but he is. You go to him to get his take on things, his opinion.
What do you read into the? Because the only other blogger I know that has this sort of, aside from like Freakonomics, who has this sort of relationship is Tegan Goddard at Political Wire. He had his own blog, and he's had it for years, and but CQ Politics apparently basically bought it.
Right.
He still has the same blog. There's just a button at the top next to Tegan Goddard's Political Wire. There's brought to you by CQ Politics. Right. Presumably he has some sort of a financial relationship where they pay him. He keeps his own blog, but they serve ads there. Is this a new model, or is this... What do you think?
Well, the model seems to be that the blogging-only model sucks and rarely makes any money. There's not enough ad revenue out there to get to sustain as a blogger as your sole source of income. So if you can establish a certain amount of credibility and reputation and get a larger media outlet to pay you a salary of some sort, that's a better model.
Well, it also, does it, on one hand, obviously the big outlet gets someone who's a good writer, someone who's interesting, who probably already has like a Twitter following that can drive traffic to the site. But I'm wondering if allowing them to keep their own sort of brand is a bit of a firewall, so that if one of these bloggers says something or does something controversial, does that provide a bit of distance as opposed to having them actually write on the New York Times page the way that, say, Dave Weigel does at the Washington Post?
Well, we talked about this a while back when the Freakonomics guys got in a lot of hot water for peddling, bogus science in their latest book. The Times did not have to answer for anything. No one even seemed to pose the question. I think not to be a martyr, but except for me. I'm not aware of anyone who said, the Times has to answer the fact that they have a blog on the Times site. And the Times site is not, blogger.com. It's a news site with certain standards, and they need to have editors to monitor their stuff. And that never happened, and the Freakonomics guys are still there. So yeah, I think maybe it shouldn't give them that distance, but in practice, it seems to give them that distance. And also gives them a service in case they feel the relationship doesn't work out, they can part their ways. And Nate still has his brand, and the Freakonomics guys have their brand. They can go off and do their own stuff still.
So okay, but let's get now to the ideological question. My concern, but it's not about disclosure. I think everybody knows Nate Silver is a liberal. But the issue is, why aren't they hiring conservatives? I mean, the Washington Post hired a guy who isn't really a conservative to cover conservatives for the Washington Post. Dave Weigel, who, I like Dave, and, I mean, he's conservative in some ways. I'm not going to say he's a leftist, but he's not really a conservative. And I think he does generally a good job, although, I wrote about it, the Twitter controversy a few weeks ago. But, and then they also have Ezra, who's, obviously liberal, blatantly so. Why can't they hire conservative writers?
Well, I mean, CNN did hire Erick Erickson. I mean, it's like no conservative getting hired is not.
Well, that's not the New York Times or the. That's TV, though.
That's TV.
I mean,
we haven't seen.
Well taken.
Since the Washington Post has failed hiring of Ben Domenech. Am I pronouncing his name right?
I think it's Domenech. He was one of the co-founders of Red State. He was briefly at the Washington Post. Now he's at a thing called the New Ledger. That's where he writes now. He was recently embroiled in a controversy where he wrote something for CBS News. He's the guy who happened to mention that Elena Kagan might be gay.
Well, I mean, and this I think is the issue. Forgive me, Matt, if I seem impolite. But I suspect that the New York Times and the Washington Post, because they've always been so skittish about being seen as liberal media. I mean, they love. The Times now has two conservative columnists. They used to only have one. Now they have David Brooks and they have Ross Douthat, because they want to be seen as having a balanced opinion page. Washington Post op-ed page is arguably more conservative than liberal. Charles Krauthammer, George Will, their editorial board leans right with Fred Hyatt. But when it comes to cultivating, new online voices. And maybe they're not paying attention to Matt Lewis enough, so I'll exempt you from this, Matt.
Look, I would do it. I would love, given the opportunity, I would love to do it. But it's not just me. I could give them a list of 10 people that I think would do a good job.
But I think a number of these guys get themselves into journalistically questionable hot water, and so there isn't as obvious a candidate to pluck to do something that's going to be seen as journalistically respectable.
Well, I don't know. I think that it depends. There are bloggers and there are bloggers, and there are different types of bloggers, as you correctly noted earlier. So,
well, I'd be curious to see how well the Daily Caller does on this, because this is Tucker Carlson's goal, is to have a conservative news site that has journalistic chops, and they're certainly trying. And if I would. A sign of success that would be if the Daily Caller starts getting rated by sites like the New York Times and the Washington Post for talent.
Yeah, well, look, here's the deal. There are some people who believe that the old media is dead, and that there are some people who would say if you had a choice to work at the Washington Post or Politico, you should take Politico. Some people would say that, and they have an interesting argument to make, because Politico is obviously doing tremendously well, and they're a 21st century outlet. But there is still something, regardless of how bad the Washington Post and New York Times have blown things in the past, there is still something in this day and age, credible, that sort of getting your, what was it that Maureen Dowd said going on Imus, because she got her card stamped or whatever. When you write for the Washington Post or the New York Times, that lends you, fair or not, a certain amount of credibility for the rest of your career. And if liberal bloggers are getting that credibility at a young age, but yet conservative bloggers who are deserving are not, then 20 years from now that could still have ramifications. And look, at the micro level, it probably doesn't matter, but at the macro level, when the people who are seen as the experts or the opinion thought leaders are all liberal, well, guess what? It's because they got the shot. There needs to be an affirmative action thing, Bill. There needs to be affirmative action for conservatives in the media. That's the answer to this. I will illustrate the absurdity by being absurd. I think a quota system would be good. A certain number of conservative bloggers hired by the Washington Post, or frankly, I think we need to raise hell.
I mean, in all seriousness, if you're talking to conservative friends of yours in D.C. who honestly want to get in on that action, I would suspect that both the Times and the Post would love to have conservative journalists from the online world in their stable. I mean, they want as much market share as possible.
They don't.
What's that?
I don't think they do, Bill. I don't think they want.
If you want to mistrust it, that's your own choice. I bet if there was a James O'Keefe, for Pete's sake, who again, in my mind, already discredited himself, got himself a scoop fed to ABC this week. The census thing, no one else seemed to pick up on because it was such a lame scoop. But they want these things. They don't want James. Here's the thing, though, Bill. A major distinction. They don't want James O'Keefe with the credibility and the imprimatur of the Washington Post. They want him as a circus show. They want to talk about him and write about him just like the Tea Party people. But they don't want them. In O'Keefe's case, I agree with you. He'll never get a Times or a Post gig because of the way he goes about things. But if there was one or more conservatives that was regularly, making news, getting scoops that held up over time, I bet you they would get snapped up at the Times or the Post.
Why isn't Jim Garrity at the New York Times or the Washington Post? He's a great reporter. David Ferdoso, Byron York, Rich Lowry. Look, not to toot my own horn, but I would challenge people, go read the stuff I've written at Politico.
These guys might not be trying.
I think it's very responsible. It's from a center-right perspective, but it's real, in many cases, reporting, or at least fair analysis. I think if Rich Lowry, or maybe not Rich because he's the editor of NRO, but there are a lot of good reporters out there, several of which I've just mentioned. I could put together a list if anyone was interested, but they're not getting these opportunities to go to the New York Times or the Washington Post.
I honestly think you should organize those guys. You should call Bill Keller at the Times, set up a meeting, and say, we're concerned here, but what do you need to see from our work that would make you comfortable hiring one of us to do the kind of thing that Nate Silver is doing? I bet you get a fair hearing.
I don't even think I could get him on the phone, but we'll see. We could continue this discussion off. So,
well, should we end it on that note, sir?
The man is always keeping us down, Bill. I don't know, man. Well, why don't you plug the conference again before we go?
Thank you. America's Future Now, June 7th, 8th, and 9th, Omni Shoreham Hotel, Washington, D.C. Speaker Pelosi, Alan Grayson, Senator Dick Durbin, Darcy Bernard, Deepak Bhargava on the great debate of progressives in the Obama era, Richard Trumka, Andy Stern, Arianna Huffington, Jesse Jackson, Marcos Digby, John Amato, new voices, old voices, all bases are covered. I know, Matt, conservatives will want to be there to take the temperature of the progressive movement. The progressives want to be there to be engaged in this very important political year. ourfuture.org/now for more.
Awesome. Well, check us out on Twitter at The Weekend Blog. Check us out on Facebook.com/The Weekend Blog. You can catch us on iTunes. Just look for Blogging Heads, and you'll find us there. And we will see you next week on The Week in Blog. Good night, California.